Hello and welcome to the final session, session 4 in your training on understanding and responding to sexual abuse. In this session, we're going to look at what kind of practice materials you can use to have productive discussions with young people, to encourage them to maybe find trust and faith in us, and possibly then encourage being able to show us and tell us what's happening in their lives. So what can we do? We know that the dynamics of interfamilial abuse make it really difficult for people to come forward. And so what was suggested in the parliamentary review in 2015 was that as social workers in particular and other practitioners is that we need to be really good at recognising the indicators. We need to know how to communicate with the child, and there's a really good resource now from the CSA Centre specifically on communicating with children around sexual abuse. And we need to give them the space and the time so that they can show us, explain to us their feelings, and give the opportunity for them to be able to have trusted relationships where they can share what they need to share about what's going on in their lives. We have the research now on what barriers there are for children telling and showing. So let's think for a moment about what barriers might be created by the abuser. So it might be that they're very negative about the child to services. They may have a range of explanations about why the child is behaving as they are. Or it might be that they present as somebody that's really helpful and they're really integrated with the family and well loved by the child. Conversely, they may convince the child that it's their fault, or we know that sometimes children are threatened that if they say anything, what will happen to them. From Allnock and Miller's research, we know that children have said that the reason they don't tell anyone include not having anyone to tell. Or maybe they don't understand they're being abused because they don't have the emotional capacity, they don't have the understanding, to do with their age or disability, for instance. Or it might be that they do understand what's happening to them, but they're deeply ashamed and embarrassed about it. Or going back to the previous slide when we're talking about the threats, they might be really afraid of what will happen if they do say anything. Some research was recently carried out with adult survivors of child sexual abuse, and these are some of the things that they said was why they didn't tell anyone about it when they were younger. They feared more violence. They didn't think people would be sympathetic. They didn't think they'd be believed. They didn't think anyone would or could do anything about it. They felt embarrassed. They didn't have anyone to tell. They thought it would be humiliating, and it was a private family matter. One of the important things that we can do in terms of direct work is address the issue of secrets and secret keeping. So secret keeping is often one of the ways that a abuser will gain control over a child by engaging in secret keeping, and then making the secret keeping more intense as the child gets older. For example, they may offer to keep a specific secret or ask if this activity that they're doing with the child is kept secret and made exciting and special. And so when the children are young, you can just ask for a simple secret keeping activity. But as the relationship progresses and that child gets older and starts to question more what's happening, then the abuser might need to change their tactic and maybe start to use guilt and then ultimately use force, because as the child develops in their understanding and their emotional awareness, the threats have to increase to maintain the child's secrecy. Here are some suggested ways about how we can get past the barriers. Could we perhaps focus on giving each child in the family a voice, and maybe that could be our role? Could we support them to have time away from the family home? Could we always have a bit of a healthy skepticism so that we can think about what information is provided by the adult and really question where that information is coming from? Can we teach children about sexual abuse? Can we make sure that they've got the correct name for different parts of the body and their genitals? Can we teach them that abuse is never a child's fault? Can we teach them that there are people they can talk to if they've got worries? And can we do deliberate work around secret keeping? maybe some of these things that you can do in your role. Before telling someone, you want to lock your mouth up. You feel like you have a dead end, you've hit a dead end and you don't know what to do, and you're trapped and your feelings are trapped inside you and you don't know what to do. You're worried and you're scared, and you might feel angry, confused, and also you might feel like you've locked yourself in a prison and that's keeping your worries from coming out. And that was a female aged 8 talking about her feelings. So often with these cases, we'll be working with the child, suspect that sexual abuse is taking place, and we're there waiting for the disclosure. And often when we think of disclosure, we think of the child being able to directly tell us and explain what's happening to them, to understand it and have the words to explain it. Normally when we think about disclosure, we think about someone verbally sharing information with us. But in this scenario, really, we're thinking about how somebody might tell or show, because they're more likely to show us in a way that's indirect than direct. So they might do it through the behaviour, they might do it through leaving cues like drawings or dropping hints in terms of the questions that they're asking us. It's much more likely as they get older that they're going to do it in other ways. So it might be that they're showing us through their self-harming behaviour or through their aggression or through their discomfort being around certain people. Children are more likely to tell us and blurt it out when they're younger and they don't understand the consequences. So I'm inviting you to think about, in what ways have children and young people shown you their emotional states in the past, and what do you think they were trying to communicate to you? In retrospect, can you think of times where people may have been trying to tell you something, but the research shows that many times we've missed those cues, and I know definitely that I've done that in my practice in the past. Allnock talks about disclosure as a process, that it's influenced equally by how we respond in that interaction as how the child or the young person does. And this is like a dance that we do between each other, and it will move forward if we respond in a way that is what the child or the young person wants us to do or say. And if we don't, then maybe that interaction will cease or it'll go backwards. And this dance can take place over years sometimes, with the child or the young person testing the ground at each stage of the way to see how we're going to respond. So each of our interactions, will be part of this process. This was the way in which one child chose to make her disclosure to her worker using symbols. And from these symbols, you can have a clear idea around the emotions that are happening for this child. And the worker was able to find out more information as they discussed what the symbols meant. If she doesn't tell, it means she won't get told off. And in this research, 11-year-old was able to draw the sadness that the child felt, the pool of tears that she was crying, and then the laughter and the mocking of somebody else who was onlooking, maybe who was in control of her. You might not think of telling anyone. You might not realise how serious it is. You might be just like, oh, it's a one-off thing. Especially if it's your family, because you still feel like you want to protect them. That's why it's harder. You might realise that people aren't supposed to do it. I think it all just comes back to, it's still your family, really. And the issue of it being your family is one of the key aspects of this, and helps us understand why it is that it's so difficult for children and young people to come forward, because of the love and loyalty and the fear of what will happen if they do. My dad hit me a lot when I was younger, and he touched me in places that were not right. I feel like what happened was my fault, and I shouldn't have been a naughty child. I don't remember the last time I was happy, I just always feel sad. And this is from the Jackson research from Children's Disclosures at Childline. So we know that we need to find ways to help children show us or tell us what's going on. And that might involve having brave conversations, being comfortable talking about sex and relationships, being comfortable asking children about their feelings. We need to be able to tell them over and over again that we'll believe them if they tell us something. We need to talk about sexual abuse, have an open dialogue about it. We need to get rid of the shame that's attached to this particular type of abuse. We need to build really good attachment relationships. We need to talk about, read, discuss secrets, trust, shame and sadness. We need to talk about different kinds of relationships, what relationships mean. Should you keep secrets in relationships? What kind of touch is appropriate in relationships? And we need to have books around where there's stories about abuse, or stories where there's children in scenarios where there's unsafe touch, or talking about children's rights and their bodies. Many people have said in the training room that they're worried about what they should do if a child discloses. And essentially, it's about making sure that you give the child your full attention. You don't panic and start writing notes. Just sit, breathe and listen. Stay calm, reassure the child, because they will no doubt feel very frightened and anxious once they've started or after they've told you. Let the child just take their time and go at their own pace. Sit with the silence and let them process what they're saying and doing. Let them use their own words and say it in their own way. You can always clarify what they mean afterwards. Don't make promises that you can't keep. We don't know what's going to happen after a child makes a disclosure to us. But we can say that we'll do our best to help them and find people that can take it forward. We need to tell the child exactly what we plan to do next, in small, understandable chunks of information. And we absolutely don't confront the perpetrator or criticise them or make comments on them, because often this will be a person that the child has a very close relationship with because of the grooming process. So Walsh et al. In their research say that school-based prevention programs can have an impact, and that children who participated in abuse prevention programs were over 3 times more likely to talk about sexual abuse than those who hadn't. It did increase children's knowledge in how to keep them safe from sexual abuse. And so here we've got some examples of the kind of direct work that you could do. In a range of roles, these options are possible. Safe and unsafe touch. The issue of consent. What is true consent? Get examples from the children about what they think is consent. Show them scenarios. Talk about it. Find games to play where you debate if something is consensual or not. Teach children about sexual abuse. Talk to children about who they trust on and offline. And if they did have any worries, who would they tell? And work on increasing emotional literacy. Children talk about how they can't find the words to explain this thing that's happening to them. But if they can find the words to explain their feelings, then they can start to talk about that and start to let go of some of the ways in which they feel. And here we have some examples of some little worksheets which help us talk about different feelings. So in the top right we've got anger, and the child can choose how they feel anger. The feelings of anger is it a banging drum, a monster, red mist, an adrenaline rush? If I gave my anger a name, I would call it, and I would describe it like. We have the same for sadness and low mood, happiness, joy and excitement, and putting up defences, protecting ourselves. All of these things can help us understand the child more deeply, and it can help them understand themselves and put names and words. Because if we're going to process trauma, we have to find ways of being able to express it through words or pictures. Here I've just put some examples of books that you might want to go and have a look at. There's some for adolescents, Let's Talk About Sex, My Body Belongs to Me, and then there's some younger ones about secret keeping, talking about bodies, like Everyone's Got a Bottom. And then The Exceptional Children's Guide to Touch is for children who may have difficulties integrating information, disability. So it's thinking about ways that we can have those discussions with all children using very visual methods. And so if we're going to meet the child's needs in these scenarios, we need to make sure that first we protect the child. So have we made their home safe for them? We need to increase the social support available to the child and the family, because interfamilial sexual abuse affects the whole family. And we need to treat the physiological symptoms of the trauma and the behaviours that go with that. Therefore, multi-agency working is absolutely essential, because the children's needs are varied and each child in the family will need to be assessed, because they will all have different needs around intervention and support. And finally, listening to young people carefully, helping them recognise how past experiences influence their ways of relating to the world today, and offering a trustworthy relationship where they can try to build a safer life for themselves. It might be the most important service that we can offer them. It's through the reforging of social bonds and the development of different types of relationships that young people can learn to live with the legacy that trauma leaves, and where the hope for a different type of life can be fostered. Being that trusted person who cares, who has a relationship, who listens, it's all incredibly useful to have that. Relationships are the key to recovery from trauma. And so we have some organisations here. The Survivors Trust, which is an umbrella organisation for survivors of sexual abuse, and they've got a helpline and directory of services on their website. There's an organisation called Respond, which specialises in working with child sexual abuse and with people with learning difficulties and disabilities. It's a therapeutic based service and it's in London, but they work nationally. The Lucy Faithfull Foundation also runs the organisation Stop It Now, which is a prevention organisation and has a helpline for people who might be worried about their own thoughts and feelings about children, or if you've got a partner or a family member who you think might be grooming or has been accused of sexual abuse. The NSPCC run a programme called Letting the Future In, where you can read the evaluation on that programme on their website. And there's also a range of teaching packs for schools, for example, one of which is called Making Sense of Relationships, and you can find that on the nwg.org network in the resources section. Here are a few more organisations for you. Ben's Place, which although is based in Yorkshire, has a helpline number, and that specifically works with boys and men who have experienced sexual assault. Mozac, which is a really useful one for parents, for non-abusing parents, and again there's a helpline for parents and carers. Safeline includes siblings in that, which is support for friends and families of people who've been sexually abused. And then there's Real Love Rocks, which is a Bernardo's Healthy Relationships resource. And there's different versions of those. They've recently updated them. And those of you that work with special education needs, this is a really good resource. So suggestions of things that you might want to go and do. You can order the Pandasaurus pack and watch the film. You can talk to your colleagues and make a resource pack of local agencies. You could provide emotional support to young people and their family. You can think about how we can build resilience in families and in children. You could do some physical activities that work on reducing emotional stress on the body, like grounding techniques and teaching children breathing exercises or yoga, because not all children are going to disclose, and there are still things that we can do to support young people and children's well-being, even if we don't know what's happening. So we'll talk about things that you can do together in the seminar, but these are just some ideas. So thanks very much for listening, and we'll continue this conversation when we get to the seminar.